So you're trying to build a website. Whether it is for you or for your clients, if you're watching this video, you're probably trying to decide between Webflow and WordPress. And if you take one thing from this video, let it be that both are excellent choices. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Ultimately, which tool you use is going to go down to things such as your own personal experience, the budget for the project, and the specific requirements of the project at hand. Now, I've seen a lot of these videos in the past, and while I'm certainly not the first person and I will not be the last person to make one of these videos, I find that a lot of these videos are made by people who either only use Webflow or only use WordPress. And so what you're going to get from that is a very biased and one-sided viewpoint. Me, on the other hand, my name is Julian and I work for MemberStack. If you don't know what MemberStack is, it's a tool that you can use to add payments, subscriptions, gated content, logins, and much more to your website. Whether that website is built in Webflow or WordPress does not matter. You can use MemberStack for both. So I have no interest in trying to sell you one versus the other. I've been a web developer for the past 10 years of my life. And at the start, I used every single tool, whatever my clients wanted me to, really. So I got exposure to tools such as Wix and Squarespace. I got exposure to tools such as Webflow and WordPress. And I've even got exposure to building sites with fully custom code. Now, for the past 7 or so years of my life, I have been primarily focused on Webflow. But for the past 6 or so months, I've been getting heavily back into WordPress. And just as I love Webflow, I have been absolutely loving WordPress. So by the end of this video, you're not going to have a clear picture on which tool is better, because there is no answer for that. But you will have the same understanding that I have, that I use to decide when I should use Webflow and when I should use WordPress. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing I want to go over in this video is what is WordPress and what is Webflow? So let's get started with WordPress. WordPress is an open source CMS that was first released in 2003. That means it's almost as old as I am, and it is the undisputed champion on the internet. Over 40% of all websites on the internet are built in WordPress. Now, WordPress itself, like I said, is an open source CMS. It is built and contributed on by a community of people, which you can join. And when you get WordPress, you can view, edit, delete, change, do whatever you want to do to the actual code. That being said, WordPress is not something you can simply use and build an entire site directly with WordPress. It's just the CMS. You're going to need to figure out things like hosting, page builders, plugins, and all sorts of those things for yourself. Now, moving on to Webflow. Webflow is a newer option that was first released in 2013. And Webflow is a SaaS product. That means software as a service. And Webflow is essentially a tool that you can log into, build a website from start to finish, pay, and have your website live. So in that sense, it is very, very different, both in terms of company structure and building experience. So the two are fundamentally different. But at the end of the day, what you're doing with both is building a website. So now that we understand what Webflow is and what WordPress is, I think a very important thing to start with is the pricing of both tools. So the first one that I want to get into is WordPress. Now, here's the thing about WordPress. Remember how I said it's an open source CMS? What that means is it is open, it is free. You can get and use WordPress without paying anyone a dime, without giving anyone your credit card information or anything like that. But as I also said, WordPress is not all you need to build a site. There are more things that you need to consider, such as your hosting, such as your plugins, and all of these things do cost money. So while you won't actually be paying WordPress any money, the bill to run your site can get very complicated. I've seen WordPress sites run for as low as $2 a month, and I've seen WordPress sites run at thousands of dollars a month. If you have very, very high hosting needs, you need a bunch of premium plugins, whatever it may be, your WordPress bill could be very low or very high. Now let's talk about Webflow's pricing. And despite Webflow being a centralized owned company, Webflow's pricing is anything but simple. And a lot of people in the Webflow community can get a little bit frustrated by that. So Webflow's pricing splits into 4 different categories, and you may need to pay for only one of these. You may need to pay for all 4, that depends. And those categories are workspace plans, site plans, add-ons, and third-party tools. So while I'm not going to get into the exact cost of each one of those, I'm going to go through them a little bit, and I'm going to give you an idea of how much those things could cost. Let's get started with workspace plans. So a workspace plan is exactly what it sounds like. It's what you pay for the space that you and your colleagues are working in. So if you only want to host one site with Webflow and that is it, you probably will be able to get by with the free workspace plan and not pay for a workspace plan. That being said, Webflow workspace plans start at around $16 a month and move up to around $40 per month, and that price is billed per seat. So if you have 10 coworkers, let's say, you could be paying upwards of $400 a month for your workspace plan. But typically you're not going to need that unless you are a professional who makes a living off of building sites in Webflow. The next thing I want to talk about with Webflow pricing is site plans / hosting plans, we can call them. So this is the one thing that pretty much every single website is going to need. If you want to put your site on a custom domain, that is absolutely mandatory. And Webflow's site plans range from $18 a month for their cheapest plan, no CMS, nothing like that, all the way up to $364 a month. If you have complicated needs in terms of features, hosting, and stuff like that, you could end up with a bill going up to $360 a month. And if you have very high needs, you may even have to go into the Webflow Enterprise tier, which can go all the way up to $10,000 a month and beyond, as far as my knowledge. The next thing I want to talk about is add-ons, and you can think of add-ons like what plugins are for WordPress, but the only difference about Webflow's add-ons is that they are actually made and maintained by the Webflow team themselves. And as of the time of recording this video, there are 3 add-ons. There is localization, there's analyze, and there's optimize. Localization allows you to add different languages and locales to your website, and that starts from $9 a month per locale. Then we have Analyze, which is essentially analytics for your Webflow site. I personally haven't used it, but I have heard some good things about it, and that starts at $29 a month. Then we have Optimize, and Optimize is the most expensive one of these by far, starting at $299 a month. Now, Analyze is actually AI-powered A/B testing. So while I have heard a lot of people say, oh, that's very expensive, I would disagree, being that I've seen some very, very high traffic sites where an investment such as $300 a month for something like A/B testing is absolutely nothing. So that's not really going to be used on the majority of sites, but it may work for you depending on the site that you're working on. And the final thing to think about when it comes to the pricing of Webflow is third-party tools. Now, you will not necessarily need any third-party tools. It just depends on what you're doing on your website. But third-party tools such as MemberStack may need to be added to your site to give it the behavior that you actually want. And there are all sorts of third-party tools at all sorts of different price points. So to conclude the pricing chapter of this video, Webflow is almost always more expensive than WordPress when it comes to pricing. That being said, it may not cost you more money to run a Webflow site as it would to run a WordPress site. We're going to get more into that throughout this video about how you can actually save a ton of money running your Webflow site. The next thing I want to talk about in this video is getting started with WordPress and getting started with Webflow and what that experience actually looks like. So let's get started with WordPress. So like I said, WordPress is simply a CMS, and they make you do all of the work. You need to consider things like hosting, things like plugins, and so on when you are building your site. That being said, the WordPress ecosystem has built some amazing solutions which make it so that people with zero prior web development experience can fairly easily get their WordPress site up and live on the internet. For example, something that I use to start building a WordPress site locally with one click is called Local WP. Awesome tool. I haven't paid for it, although they do have some paid plans. And along with that, certain domain providers such as Namecheap and GoDaddy have one-click solutions to get a live and hosted WordPress site for as cheap as about $4 a month. So getting started with WordPress is not necessarily the most straightforward thing, but there are easier ways to do it. So when you're getting started with your WordPress site, there are 2 things that you will more than likely need to think about. And those 2 things are your builder and your plugins. So your builder is exactly what it sounds like. Your builder is what you use to build pages on your website. And there are a ton of different builders, just to name a few off the top of my head. You've got Elementor, you've got Divi, you've got Beaver Builder, you've got Gutenberg, you've got Bricks, you've got Oxygen, you've got Breakdance, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of different builders, and there are builders for people who are brand new to web development that are very easy drag and drop, such as builders like Divi. And there are builders that are made to be more advanced, such as Bricks Builder, which is what I've been loving. It is a very similar experience to building in Webflow. And the next thing you need to consider is plugins. So like I said, you may and more than likely are going to need a variety of different plugins on your site. Most of them are free/freemium, where they have paid plans for more advanced users. But for example, two plugins that you may want to use is if you have a site with more complex CMS requirements, such as Bricksboard, something that we've made for Bricks Builder users. You can find that at the link in the description. We needed the Advanced Custom Fields plugin to build out custom collection types, such as components. And we needed the Member Stack plugin to allow logins, signups, payments, and gated content on our site. So this sounds complicated, and I'm going to be honest with you, it will be at the start. But once you build a couple of WordPress sites, you're going to have a pretty clear feeling for which builder you're going to want to use, which plugins you're going to need, and so on. So it does get easier, but it will definitely be more complicated to getting started in comparison to Webflow. So like I said, getting started with Webflow is easy. You go to webflow.com, you click to create a site, you can start from a template, you hit publish, it's live on the internet. That is all there is to it. Getting started with Webflow is simple. Again, unless you need specific third-party plugins or anything like that, you are going to be able to get a site launched with Webflow. I bet you pause this video right now, you can have a site live on the internet in the next 10 minutes. Which I can't necessarily say the same thing about WordPress. So when it comes to getting started and getting a site live on the internet, I'm gonna have to say it is a lot easier with Webflow. So now that we've discussed getting started and actually just creating your first site, whatever that may be, the next thing you're gonna need to do is actually build that site out to your or your client's specifications, whatever it is that you need. So the next thing I want to talk about in this video is exactly that, the experience when you're building a site with one versus the other. So I want to get started by talking about building a site with WordPress and what that feels like. Now, a lot of people, including myself, would describe building a site in WordPress as these two things. On the bright side, limitless. You want to do it, you can do it. The other thing is fragmented, and that means there are a lot of moving pieces to your site, and they do not necessarily fit together so well. That being said, it is limitless. Whatever you want to do with WordPress, as long as you or a developer that you're working with is comfortable with coding, is comfortable specifically with PHP, then you will be able to build anything that you or your client's heart desires in WordPress. That being said, you may need custom code, you may need custom plugins, you may need all sorts of things in order to make that work. So if the top priority for your project right now is that there are no limits, that you can upgrade little pieces here and there, then WordPress is an excellent option. Now, just to give you a clear understanding of what I mean by the whole fragmentation aspect, is this. Let's say you're building a site with Bricks Builder and you need some other sort of plugin. Let's say something that you need for recipes. Well, you can get the two, you can install both of them on your site. That being said, if you go ahead right now and say how to use this plugin with Bricks Builder, unless those plugin developers made the plugin with Bricks Builder in mind, you're probably going to have a very difficult time trying to get the two to sync up or do whatever you want them to do. Now, a lot of plugins were made with certain builders in mind, which makes this a lot easier, but you really need to be careful about which plugins you're getting and that they are going to fit in with all of the other plugins in the page builder that you are using. Because if you don't do that, you can have a situation where building things on your site, especially to be visually cohesive, you can run into some pretty difficult situations. That being said, on the bright side, all of these plugins mean that for anything you want, such as, like I said, recipes. There are plugins out there that you can install and get recipes live on your site with the proper schema, with the proper structure, and all of that in just a few clicks. Whereas with Webflow, it is almost never that simple. Now let's move on to what it feels like to build a site with Webflow. And building a site with Webflow, as I have done so many times, is a really, really enjoyable experience. Unlike WordPress, Webflow is, for the most part, not fragmented. Webflow is something where almost whatever you need to do can be accomplished with Webflow's in-house features. Now, that is especially true when it comes to custom design control. Webflow is made so that anything that you can design in a tool like Figma can be built in a tool like Webflow. Now, as great as all of that sounds, there are certain times where you're going to run into limitations. This isn't Webflow's fault, but Webflow cannot consider each and every one of their users and each and every one of those users' use cases. So you more than likely will run into some certain situations where you need to do something that Webflow does not allow you to do right out of the box. And often when that's the case, you need to come up with some hacky workarounds, such as adding custom code in places that doesn't make sense, because Webflow does not allow you to edit anything like the server files. So let me give you an example of how that looks. So if you are trying to, let's say, add a certain element, which Webflow does not allow by default, let me give you an example, the canvas element. Let's say you need that for your project and Webflow doesn't have it. You often need to add an embed and then write the HTML to add your canvas to your page. Whereas an experience I ran into with Bricks Builder is the same thing. I needed an element. They didn't allow me to add it. I went into the Bricks Builder code, I changed it, and suddenly I can add that element. So you're actually able to, with WordPress, remove limitations, whereas with Webflow, you can't. That being said, I will give Webflow a ton of credit. In recent years, they have made a ton of steps to make Webflow far more limitless, with things such as the custom element that allow you to essentially visually build HTML, whether you need the canvas element or something else. So kudos to Webflow for that. The next thing that I want to talk about in this video is the experience of maintaining your site. So you've gotten started, you've got a site live on the internet that you or your clients are happy with, but the nature of websites is that they change, and there are going to be times where you need to update things on your website. There are going to be things that break that you need to fix. So I want to give you my experience of maintaining a site in WordPress and in Webflow. So first things first, let's get started with WordPress. So one thing, again, that is amazing and cannot be understated about WordPress is that it is limitless. Perhaps right now you or your clients have only envisioned your site as being, well, what it is right now, but your client wants some new feature. With WordPress, the beauty is that almost always you can still work that feature into your site because it's limitless. You could edit the code, you could do whatever it is that you want to do. That is a huge plus for WordPress. But on the negative side, WordPress sites are a myriad of different plugins, hosting, and all sorts of different things, all of which have their own independent changes. So along with the fact that WordPress itself updates, so do all of your plugins. And usually it's as simple as one-click update and you're good to go. But sometimes these plugins introduce changes that are going to break your site, and then it is up to you to figure out how to fix that, which can definitely be annoying and can also be very, very costly when it comes to the amount of time your site might be down or whatever may happen. Another important thing to mention about WordPress sites is that they are a very hot target for hackers. And I just want to say, this is not necessarily WordPress's fault. This is due to the fact that WordPress gives you full control. Things such as bad code on your end, plugins which haven't been updated in a while and have been infiltrated, and even bad passwords for your WordPress admin can lead to your site being hacked. And unlike Webflow, if your WordPress site is hacked, you are on your own to figure that out. So if you're building a site with WordPress, that is something you need to take very seriously, because your whole site is worth nothing if somebody hacks it and takes it down. So now let's talk about Webflow. And for the bad side of things, it's the flip side of what I started off with WordPress. And that is that I've seen situations where a client builds a site, and then they want to add something to the site after, which can't necessarily be done with Webflow. They need certain server files or whatever that Webflow does not allow them to touch. That is bad. On the good side, when it comes to Webflow, everything else with maintaining your site. You can pretty much build a site with Webflow, stick it on the internet, and 3 years later, that site will be just as it is. Because if we go back right now to the pricing segment of this video, remember where I said you pay Webflow a subscription every single month? That covers them maintaining your site. If Webflow updates and that breaks something in your site, that is something that Webflow is responsible to help you figure out. Webflow is not supposed to have any sort of breaking changes like that. In my 7 years of being a Webflow developer, I have never seen a Webflow update break a live site. So depending on your situation, you could really save a lot of money with Webflow's hosting fee. Although it may upfront seem like more money, in the long run, you may save a lot of money. And the other thing that I want to mention about maintaining your website with Webflow is that in recent years, Webflow has made some incredible strides towards making website updates for non-web developers very, very easy. Things like the limited designer role allow people like your clients, their marketers, so on and so forth, to use your pre-built elements that have a good class structure, that have everything is made well to build things like landing pages. So you're probably with Webflow going to run into less calls from the client saying, I broke the site, what do I do? Which is a huge plus for Webflow. The next thing I want to get into, which is huge and cannot be understated, is ecosystem/communities with these two tools, because the tool itself is one thing, but if nobody in the community is actively contributing to it, helping it, answering people's questions, well, the tool itself isn't very useful. And the beautiful news is with both Webflow and WordPress, the communities are alive and thriving. So WordPress is undoubtedly the biggest community of the two. Whatever language you speak, no matter where you go, whatever you type in, you can find information about how to do that with WordPress. That being said, despite the WordPress community being huge, the communities for their specific plugins and builders are not always quite so big. So despite the fact that you can type into Google how to do X with WordPress, you may not be able to find how to do X with Beaver Builder. And that is something that you need to consider. Along with that is the multi-language communities. From my experience, if you want to learn how to do anything in Webflow, speaking English is not necessarily a must, but it's just about that, because almost all of the information about Webflow on the internet is made by people who are speaking in English. Whereas WordPress, on the other hand, you can find information about WordPress itself in pretty much any language, which I guess if you're watching this video doesn't matter because I've been speaking English the whole time. But if you do, or somebody you know doesn't speak English, that is something that they definitely need to keep in mind. So despite WordPress being undoubtedly the bigger community, the Webflow community is alive and thriving and growing really, really, really well. And they're also very passionate. So just to give you a personal example, last year I was in the small city in Serbia of Niš, where I went to FlowConf, which is a conference hosted by Flow Ninja, who is a award-winning Webflow agency. And just at that conference in a smaller city in Serbia, there were over 200 people there to listen to talks and to talk about Webflow, which is amazing. I can only imagine when you start going to bigger cities like London, like San Francisco, the size of the Webflow communities there. So Webflow's community, while it may be smaller than WordPress, is very, very active, very, very pleasant to deal with, and just an awesome group of people. So both tools have really great communities, and you're not going to be feeling left alone. So to wrap up this video, I just want to give you my final thoughts. And like I said at the start, I absolutely love both tools. Now, when would I use one versus the other? Let me give you a couple of examples. My own personal site that I simply built in about 3 or 4 hours, launched it on the internet and don't want to touch it, I did that with WordPress because my monthly hosting bill is about $4 a month. And that is perfectly fine. It would be 5-6 times that if I was using Webflow. Now, on the other hand, if I was to have, let's say, a client who is a SaaS company who has marketers and all of that to maintain their site, and they said, which tool do you recommend we should use to build our site? I would 1000% recommend Webflow, because even though their hosting bill is going to be higher, they are going to save tremendous amounts of money on their own internal staff maintaining their site, on not having to do emergency fixes to their site and stuff like that. So both tools, absolutely phenomenal. Which one you use totally depends on your situation at hand. So I hope this was a useful video to you. If you have any questions or want to know anything that I maybe didn't mention in this video, please drop a comment below and I will 100% get back to you. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.